Thank you for listening to Permission Granted. I'm your host, Juliette Ricci Lagman. Today on the podcast, we are honored to have Erin Joosse. She is the founder of Source Yoga, a yoga studio in Tacoma, Washington, a teacher and a scholar of both yoga and mindfulness meditation. She also teaches retreats and resides in Tacoma with her family. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh my gosh. Um, I'm just going to start out with I started on my yoga journey actually with waltzing into your studio in North Tacoma on 21st. Very stressed out for my corporate job, and I just needed some relief. And there you were. I remember you were wearing a white and pink stripe, really cute dress, and you were in the office, and you ushered me in.
Oh my gosh. Do you remember when that was? Because I'm
Yeah.
not sure how long
Uh,
how long we've known
it
each
would have
other.
been probably, I would gander 2008 or 2009, right in
Okay,
there
so
somewhere.
yeah,
Yeah.
quite some time ago. We opened the studio in 2005. So
Oh,
we hadn't
yeah.
been we were a little toddler yoga. We were a little toddler yoga studio at that point.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself, and your history.
Sure. So, let's see. Where do we want to begin? So, I actually grew up in New Mexico. But now live in Tacoma, and I will say my whole childhood living in the desert, I dreamt about living in a rainy green climate.
Wow.
So I went to college in New Mexico as well, got my bachelor's degree in dance, studied modern dance and choreography and flamenco dance. And then when I graduated, I like beelined it for Seattle. So moved up to the Pacific Northwest and haven't looked back. I've been living in Washington State longer than I ever lived anywhere else in my life. So I feel like even though I didn't grow up here, I feel like this is my home.
Oh yeah.
I definitely yes, Washington, the green, the Pacific Northwest, the rain, all of it is,
All
I
of
don't know,
it.
speaks to my Irish heritage or something. Like feels like home. Um,
The hygge, the,
yeah.
hibernating
Exactly.
and reading books.
Yeah, yes. So about 2000 moved to Washington and started teaching yoga soon after. I was a dancer. I don't know, it's a natural progression. Like a lot of dancers become yoga teachers, Pilates teachers, movement teachers in different ways, right? Um, so have been teaching yoga since about 2000 and taught in Seattle for a few years and then decided I wanted to own my own business. I wanted to run my own studio. Um,
Yeah.
I'm like an introverted person, but I've always felt really like called to leadership, like to be in leadership positions. When I was in
Yeah.
college, I did a lot of choreography, so I created dances and let like so there's just always been this part of me that wanted to be like in charge, I guess, for lack of
Yeah.
a better word, and felt comfortable in that role. So I knew when I very first started teaching yoga that I wanted to run my own studio, have my own business. So
Yeah.
2005, I was pretty intimidated about the whole process. I um, connected with a close friend of mine who I had also gone to. She was also a dancer. We went to college together. She lived in Seattle, Melissa Paz, and
Melissa
she and
Paz.
I decided to start the studio together. So we did that in Tacoma, which it was kind of like right time, right place, right
Yeah.
energy. We were one of the very first studios to open in Tacoma.
Wow.
Amazing people showed up. People like you walked in that
Yeah.
I'm still connected with. There's still people that come 20 years later. There's still people that are coming that, started coming in those first
Wow.
few years, which is amazing. Um, and Melissa stepped out of the business after 10 years. So I've been running it on my own for 10 years at this point,
Wow.
and have felt like it's been a very true journey for me.
Yeah.
Like very how do I put it? Like I feel like this path of business ownership has been like as much a part of my spiritual growth and practice as doing yoga itself. Like it just feels like an extension of that, like
Yeah.
practicing and teaching and then holding community and growing a business that is um, very intentional and
It's
like
holistic. Yeah.
yeah, like I've tried to really let my values and let what is true to me
Hmm.
lead the way with it. Over the years, I've had some really great coaching as well in how to really do that in like how to create this very like values driven, heart-centered business. It's still a business. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
still have to pay the bills. I still have to pay my taxes. I have employees.
Yeah.
And so holding both like this is a spiritual tradition
Hmm.
and I have to make rent
I
every month.
think it's, I
You know,
really see it that it's all about intention. If your intentions are pure and you are, leading with your values and your intention isn't to, grow so big that it's unmanageable or, make a bunch of money, if that's not what you're leading with, then, you're going to have a really wonderful, holistic community that you built there in Tacoma.
yeah. Well, and I did really grow to a point, like at one point I had two studios,
Yeah.
and I was leading yoga teacher training and I was leading retreats so this was all before 2020. So in 2019, I was doing all that, two studios, teacher training, retreats, teaching a bunch, managing a big staff. Like
Yeah.
it was a lot. I was reaching my kind of burnout point.
Yes. Yeah.
And then pandemic happened. We were mandated to shut our doors, figured out how to run an online business basically overnight.
Which is amazing.
And, I do feel really proud that I made it through. I'm still here, but I closed one of the studios. I closed my teacher training. Um, it was kind of a recalibration, and
Mhm.
it felt important to me to simplify the business to the point where um, that I wasn't burning myself out, that I
Well,
could really, yeah, like a sustainable business, that I could do it in a sustainable way.
yeah, and not again, not leading with, the bigger is better mindset necessarily,
Yeah, yeah.
But let's pause and touch on that because that's one thing I'm really interested in your journey. Um, First of all, the story that you tell in opening the studio, and how you meditated on it. That was such a fruitful story. And
Mm,
how you really felt your body told you, yes, this is what I
hmm
want to do. So that story always sticks with me in when I'm making any decision in my life. I kind of go back to that baseline and that visual story.
mm, hmm
And then I also want to touch on how did you have the courage and know that pivoting and sort of simplifying was the right thing to do.
mm.
So I know
Yeah, well,
that's two different
yeah,
things.
kind of the first question. I do feel like I've always had a really strong intuition,
Yeah.
like, um, and opening the studio was one of those things where it really was like, so my close friend Melissa and I, we were actually at the Olympus Spa in Tacoma, like naked in the spa,
Yeah.
having this conversation about starting a yoga studio together in Tacoma. And I didn't live in Tacoma at the time. I was in Seattle.
Oh,
And she lived down here. And she was like, Tacoma really needs a yoga studio. She knew I wanted to start one. And I was like, okay, well, let's just sleep on it. Let's just think about it for let's take a breath. And so I literally went home and slept on it and woke up the next morning and sat in meditation. And
mm.
one tool that I use sometimes is runes, Celtic runes.
Oh.
That's something that I just use as a like, what message am I going to get today? And
Mm.
or what, yeah, what might be present for me to reflect on today. And I'll draw a
Mhm.
rune. And that morning I was meditating, thinking about the possibility of opening this business. No business experience. Neither of us had any business experience.
Yeah.
And it was really like, do I want to do this with her? And I drew this rune and it was partnership.
Oh, wow.
And the rune expresses like this is reflective of partnership in all ways. So
Mhm.
business, relationships, um, spiritual, like your relationship to the divine. And and it was so clear to me in that moment, like that the answer was yes.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was just like I literally called her, like, I'm in, let's do it.
Let's do this.
And again, no business experience. We didn't know anything.
Yeah.
It was like ignorance was bliss, I guess. We didn't know what we were getting into. But it was a really like beautiful journey of figuring it out and having support from community members and figuring out like what we were good at and what we needed help with. And
Yeah.
like we figured out early on that we couldn't really do everything. We had to figure out, like, we didn't know how to design a website. We didn't know
Yeah.
how to, like, we quickly learned we didn't know how to do our books.
Yeah.
So
Amen, sister.
found somebody to help with that who is still my accountant to this day
Wow.
for the business 20 years later. Yeah. So it was a very clear yes. And there have been other times in my life that have been like, that have been moments like that, where it's like I could see this definitive line of like unclarity and then clarity and
Yeah.
then a new path forward.
So is that exactly, or not exactly, but is that kind of what happened at the pandemic when you made a
Yeah.
shift?
Well, I would say I was in a lot of unclarity. So
Mm.
I knew I didn't even know I was burnt out when the pandemic
Mm.
happened. But the minute everything shut down, it was like relief
Oh,
to me.
wow.
It was like, oh, thank God, my foot, like I can take my foot off the gas, right?
Oh,
And it
wow.
was chaotic. I have kids. They were like doing Zoom school or Teams school, whatever. It was
Yeah.
everybody. My husband suddenly started working at home. Like we were all like, what we were all dealing with, right?
Chaos.
Especially if you had kids, everybody was on top of everybody, right?
Yeah.
And trying to teach yoga from home and but the overall feeling was this feeling of relief. And
Mm.
I just let myself be in that for a while, like, okay, foot can be off the gas. I
Hmm.
figured out early on, like, I got to apply for these grants. I got to, like, how
Oh,
am I going
wow.
to financially keep this business afloat when basically, a lot of people kept their memberships going. They were super supportive of us, but I mean, our attendance and revenue dropped by half in that
Oh,
time,
yeah.
like, and
Overnight.
I still had to pay rent in two physical studios. I
Wow.
still had to pay payroll, employees. So
Yeah.
um, I figured out how to, I did as best I could. I was kind of figuring that out as I went along. And then it was when things started to open up. So it was like businesses were starting to open up. There were starting to be little openings. There were starting to be people were starting to want to gather again. Like, oh, I want to
Yeah.
come into a physical place rather than doing everything on Zoom, right? And um, I started getting intense anxiety.
Oh, wow.
So the thought of reopening caused me to feel like I feel like for a month I had a stomach ache,
Yeah. Yeah.
and every day I was I felt like I couldn't breathe. And just the whole thought of going back into the pace that I had been moving at before was just causing mass anxiety for me.
I'll never forget, I took a retreat with you at Harmony Hill, and I said to you, and it was a silent retreat, and I think it was the very last day after 2 days of silence, and I was like able to talk again. So I was like, blah, blah, blah. and, and I said to you, Erin, thank you. And this is something I'd love to talk about. Um, Thank you for taking us on this meditation journey because, at the time it wasn't as well known or widespread as it is now. And what you said is, well, and I think we touched on the simplicity piece as well. And you said, well, it's what I needed. That's why we went this way. And I was like, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and maybe that anxiety that I was dealing with actually led me to like the next phase of and I'll talk about that in a minute,
Yeah.
um, but when I was dealing with all of that anxiety is when I decided to close my second studio.
Wow.
And that was like that moment of like being in massive unclarity, and then that moment of a clear decision. And then it was like I decided to close that studio and I felt like I could breathe again. I felt
Yeah.
like and I grieve it. And I think there's community members that grieve the loss of that studio. There was a very tight-knit community there that
Yeah.
aren't necessarily, they didn't just shift to the other studio.
Yeah.
A lot of them stayed online. I'm still teaching online classes. And so there's some grief about that tight-knit community losing that. But
Absolutely.
I do not regret the decision to close that studio at all. Um,
Yeah.
so it did give me this space to be like, okay, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep this business going, but it has to be sustainable for me. And so one studio felt doable. It was our small, simple little space that we started in. It
Yeah.
felt like I could really like get my hands in there and nurture that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and it has not been easy, but it has regrown over the last few years. And like I still like I still see people coming in that's like, I haven't been in since before the pandemic.
Wow. That's amazing. And it's funny because it's just dawning on me. This is like episode 10 or whatever, and a through line that I keep hearing, and maybe this is just common in everyday conversation is the pandemic changed everybody's life in such a big way. I mean, I
Yeah.
can't talk to one person that it didn't change their whole change the direction of their life in a very
Yeah.
meaningful way.
Yeah. It's
Talk to
true.
me about how you found meditation and then went down that path of learning and moving the studio in that direction.
Hmm. Great question. Um, I've I've almost always like so my mom was a meditator, and so I always had it around me. She never forced me to meditate or anything, but like she would invite me to things every once in a while. I don't know. It was kind of, she did kind of a new agey sort of meditation, but I would go once in a
Yeah.
while with her to things, to events, and always really resonated with that, just that simple act of getting quiet, you
Hmm.
know? And in high school, I took a class, Eastern thought. So I was learning about Eastern religion. Um, I think that was really my first introduction to yoga and Buddhism. And um, s- started doing yoga in college, really. And then, and yoga and meditation was always there, like
Hmm.
in classes or Um, when I went and did my yoga teacher training, my teacher was a, a Buddhist. And so he brought in a lot of meditation and Buddhist thought, Buddhist philosophy into our training. So it was always there, like this through line through my yoga journey and my teaching journey. And we had a teacher, I think she was really the first teacher we hired at the studio when, I mean, originally Melissa and I taught all the classes. And then
Yeah.
we started to bring other people on. Sherry Williams, a lot of people in the community, if they've been
Oh,
around,
yeah.
will remember her. She lives in Seattle now. She's retired. And she had started to in a very deep way, practice and study Buddhism. And she got trained to teach mindfulness-based stress reduction,
That's right.
which
I
is
remember.
it's an 8-week program. It was designed by John Kabat-Zinn. Um, and originally it was in like he created it for the healthcare system. So in hospital to be in hospitals and working with people with chronic illness, chronic pain, that's really who the program was designed for. And now it's
Yeah.
kind of the gold standard in terms of how meditation is studied. So if you read an article and it says like this study on meditation, they very often are using that 8-week program, the mindfulness based stress reduction, to study because it's so systematic, right?
That's
So,
right.
um, and there's lots of little offshoots of it as well. So she brought it to the yoga studio. So she started leading, we call it MBSR for short, mindfulness based stress reduction. She started leading it, and I took it with her, and I could just really, I deeply resonated with it and felt
Yeah.
like I want to teach this too. And so that started kind of this long journey for me of studying meditation, going on meditation, silent meditation retreats, going to um, I went to UC San Diego, the Center for Mindfulness down there is where I did my MBSR training. So it was kind of a 5-year process to where I was like certified to teach
Yeah.
MBSR. And so I started teaching it through the studio, and I felt and weaving it into yoga classes, weaving mindfulness in and Buddhist philosophy into the retreats I was leading,
Yeah.
and into the kind of the general messaging of the studio. And yeah,
Do you have and that's one interesting thing is I've been to quite a few yoga studios, and there's a lot of them that are athletic focused, and then there's some that are more, not spiritual focused, but maybe that's the right word, but mindfulness, and health focused, in the slower way. Um, I want to ask, when you went on your first silent meditation retreat, I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, but maybe in California, what was that? Was there any experience where you had been meditating and you hit a moment of enlightenment, or any, notable experience when you were there?
Well, mostly what I remember from my first meditation retreat, and I think it was like a 3 day, it was not super long, but 3 day is, I remember it was really hard. There was no enlightenment.
I love it. Tell
I
us the
mean,
truth.
3 days of not talking
Yeah.
and alternating between 45 minutes of meditation and then 45 minutes of walking meditation and then eating and then what, like it's a lot of work. It's
Yeah.
hard. And I remember my body hurt a lot, and I would sneak off and do a yoga practice to like just deal with like sitting that long is hard.
Yeah.
Um, but there were for sure moments of like real clarity and real
Mm.
quiet and
Hmm.
peace. And I came out of it feeling very, for lack of a better word, high, like that my
Oh,
energy felt really high. Now I know because I've been on a lot of silent meditation retreats. I mean, that's kind of common, especially when you're doing it when it's
yeah.
new.
Yeah.
And then I felt like this big like letdown afterwards. Like I felt really high, and then a few days later I was like, I've never been so depressed in my life. Like
Because it's
so
such a contrast.
it's such a contrast to the way we are living our lives.
Yeah.
And I just like, how do I hold on to this? And I realized you can't, like that you have that experience and you have to let it go in order to
It's a
move back
practice.
into the light, into life. And now it's easier to come back from retreat for me. It's like, okay, now I'm dealing with the chaos of home. Okay. Um, but I mean, for sure, in the times that I've been practicing meditation and going on retreats, I've had like moments that felt real. And it's hard to say even what is enlightenment really. Like I feel like
Yeah.
uh, I even wonder if it's kind of like you have these moments of real clarity.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then the more you practice, like you have more of those moments.
Yeah, and to where it's a muscle that you develop and you get really good at it, or you carve out time, even if it's just a couple minutes a day, even if it's in your car, to sit and get centered.
Yeah. And then what I
Can
notice now is like, because I have a lot of meditation practice, like in my backpack. I don't
Yeah,
know what I'm trying to say.
in your
Like
toolkit.
in my toolkit, I've done a lot of practice. So now when things that are really challenging come up in life, because they do, like I feel like I'm not as reactive as I once
Yeah,
was, and I can kind of hold a steadier space in myself
yeah.
with difficult things that come up.
So, I had some of my earliest meditation, or only in the beginning of my yoga and meditation tenure experiences with you, I in your studio. And what I want to say is, recently I've been working with a life coach, and actually I think talked about this on our podcast. I said, "What's the best piece of advice you can give young entrepreneurs?" But this spreads to everybody, and she said, "Meditation." Meditation, meditation. So
Mm.
I've really run with that, and see that it's not so much going to the gym, or drinking all the water, which, yes, we need to do those, but out of everything, meditation. So, um, from your experience and training, what what are the simple benefits of meditation?
Hmm. Um, I mean, I'll say kind of one of the biggest things that I think is a fairly immediate experience if you practice at all for any period of time with some regularity is like emotional regulation.
Mm,
So, um, when we're sitting in a meditative practice, and I will say I don't think of meditation as being like only sitting cross-legged on a cushion
yeah,
with your eyes closed and and not talking. So I feel like I've tried to widen my view of what meditation is to be like my yoga practice is meditation. It's just an
mm,
embodied meditation through movement. That's what I really feel is most essential in a yoga practice, in a yoga asana practice for me, and what I
mm,
try to teach. Um, going going for a walk and being
yeah.
like really present, turning off. Well, if somebody is listening to this podcast while they're on a walk, great, do that. But so
Yes.
after the podcast is done, maybe just pause, take your earbuds out, like be present with like the
Mhm.
sights and smells and sounds and
Take a long walk.
yes. And I do a fair amount of like walking with podcast in my ears.
Yeah.
So,
Me too.
or, like cooking can be meditate, like anything that
Mhm.
we're bringing our attention to and we're fully present and
Yes,
yeah,
even doing the dishes, can
doing the
be seen as
dishes. Yeah.
um doing and then eating, which is such a the walking and the eating are always such a new experience if you've never done it before. But I'm just going to interject here. The simple way, I read Dan Harris's book 10% Happier,
Yeah,
and
it's
anyone
great.
listening, if you have not read that book, read it and don't stop until you get to the retreat, because that's the best part of the whole book. It is incredible. I recommend it to everybody. But what I want to say is, with the simple meditation instruction, what he says is sit down and focus on your breath. Breathe in, breathe out. And we're not trying to get rid of thoughts. We're just trying to pay attention to thoughts. So anything you can add to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the perception that a lot of people have is that they have to not think when
Mhm.
they're meditating, and then they try meditating and they have a lot of thoughts because we all do. We all have busy minds. We take in tons of information every day. Our brains are doing so much processing all the time. And especially if we haven't practiced, like letting all of that inner mental noise settle, it can
Yeah.
be discouraging right away. Like I've talked to lots of people that are like, I cannot meditate, I can't stop thinking. But the
Yeah.
thoughts are going to be there. And even, having practiced for 20 years, or longer, sometimes I still sit down to meditate and it's like, wow, it's really noisy in there right now. Okay, I'm just gonna pay attention to my breath.
Yeah.
Okay, still noisy. Like, look at all of that. And then, like, keep coming back to the breath and the body. You don't have to focus on the breath. I think for some people that can be really difficult. Sometimes focusing on the breath actually creates more anxiety for people or more
Mhm.
tension. And I actually on one retreat I went on, I kept trying to be with my breath, and it felt so tight in my
Wow.
throat for days. I was like dealing with this like tight throat, and my breath was so hard. It wasn't relieving to be with my breath. It was
Mhm.
stressful, right? And I
What did
talked
you
to my,
do?
yeah, so I talked to
Yeah.
the teacher that was guiding the retreat, and she said, "Oh, well, don't focus on your breath."
Ooh.
And I was like, "What? I can do that?" And she said, you don't have to focus on the breath. If focusing on the breath is causing more tension,
Yeah.
like what can you focus on that feels more stabilizing? So for me, very often, if I don't feel really um, calmed or centered by my breath, I'll focus on like the feeling of the palms of my hands,
Oh,
like my hands sitting in my lap. So that point of contact.
yes.
I'll turn more to body sensations. Some people really like um, sound. So connecting with just what do you hear? Like just noticing sound. Like that can
Yeah.
be a focal point of meditation. You don't have to focus on the breath. You could focus, there's lots of different things you could focus on. And this focusing in on one thing is a technique or a practice of
Yeah.
meditation, but it's not the only one.
Yes.
So, um, when we talk about mindfulness meditation is really kind of a almost like a letting go of that single pointed focus of your attention to be present to whatever is arising moment by moment. That could be the breath, it could be a sound, it could be, oh, look at that. I'm planning the rest of my day. Oh, okay. Now I'm with my belly, my breath in my belly. Oh, I feel the ground. Like our attention naturally shifts to different things.
Yeah.
It's simplest to start with one thing when we're not
Yeah.
very trained at managing all of the noise in our mind. Like it's helpful to start with one thing, like the
To
breath.
have a focal point.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a
And then
spot on the
once,
wall.
yeah,
Hmm.
once we get kind of facile with that, then it's almost like we can let go of that one single pointed thing and be with whatever is. So that's when things like you're cooking a meal and like chopping the vegetables,
Yeah.
the feeling of the knife in your hand and the what you're seeing and the smell of the of what you're cooking, like bringing in all of your senses. Like
And
I look at
it
mindfulness as being a very sensory experience.
rich, and doesn't it bring an element of joy to, being present brings the element of joy to what you're doing.
Yeah, or art, creating.
Yeah.
Like I'll mention for your listeners that there was a period of time when Juliette was living in Tacoma, and
Yeah.
she like coached me in, she became my art teacher. Like I was
Yeah.
like, I really want to explore visual art, and I don't even really know where to start. And Juliette was my teacher, and it was such a rich experience. Like that was a very
Yeah.
mindful experience, is just being with colors and textures and
Mm.
materials and
Ephemera and words.
letting go of the thought about it, like or the judgment. Like you were
Yeah.
so generous. One of your real gifts, I think, as a creative person and a teacher and an encourager of people to be creative is like we're all creative.
Yeah.
Like there's no like paid artists don't have aren't the only you're not an artist only if you're getting paid to sell your art,
Yep.
like there's ways that we can express our creativity in so many different manners. And
Yeah, I truly believe that everybody is creative. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not an artist," or "I could never." And the truth is, everybody can do it, and everybody has it because we were born to create. We are creative beings. We were created,
yeah,
and even if you take that obviously to cooking and gardening and all these million other things, but expression is in us, it's
yeah,
there.
yeah. There have been different times when my creative focus has shifted to different things. I've done a lot of
Yeah.
writing, have really focused on that as creative expression at different times. That's a little bit on the back burner for me right now. Like,
I wanted to
actually,
talk
yeah,
about the Source Yoga Journal and your writing projects, and I completely respect if writing is on the back burner. I will just share with you to put you at ease. My husband recently shot a short film in the Philippines, and invested, and then he has not since then. It was a year ago that he went and shot that, and he has not edited it. And it's just sitting there. And I said, you know what? You're focused on yoga right now. That is what's bringing you joy. Don't let it stress you out. Just put it away either for a while or forever and just move forward with your yoga journey. If that's making you happy, do that.
yeah. I have a draft of a book that I have written that is sitting, it's not sitting in a drawer because we don't do that anymore. It's sitting on my computer. But I don't know if I will ever. I feel like I'll come back around to it. I still want to write. I see that in my future, but um, honestly, in the whole time of like simplifying my business and moving through the pandemic, and I was doing a lot of writing during that time, actually.
Yeah.
And I started to think like, or I started to feel like the yoga's not the only thing I want to be doing for the rest of my career life. And but I didn't know what that was. I didn't know
Yeah.
what I just was feeling really, that was like again that like period of unclarity of feeling. And I would make lists. I had sticky notes of like different ideas of things to do. And writing was on there. Like maybe I need to really put my time and energy into getting this book published.
Mm.
And I started to go down that road a little bit. And I felt this big, like we talked earlier about like feeling a big yes when it was like
Yes.
time to. And I just felt like this like roadblock after roadblock. And I realized like, I have run a small business for 20 years. There's a fair amount of hustle, right?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
just hustle when you're running a small business. You're wearing all these hats. You're doing all the jobs. If you don't have people coming in the door, it's a lot of work.
Marketing, electrical, I mean,
Yeah.
you name it.
And I realized, oh, becoming like a writer as a career, I don't think I want another thing where I am hustling.
Yeah. Oh, I can attest to that.
And yeah, totally. That's like the plight of a creative, right? Like you want to
Yep.
create because it's your passion and you love it. And it seems like the world more and more is where creative people really have to be also marketers and
Yeah.
like managing their social media and managing, like there's just a lot that you
It's
may
a
not love
full-time
as a
job.
creative person, right? And I was like, I'm already having to work and hustle at this one thing. I don't want to also hustle at this other
Yeah.
thing. And I'd rather right now anyway, have my writing be um, just for me rather
Well,
than,
and
yeah,
as Gilbert talks about, you don't want to put that pressure of monetizing it on your creative endeavor. You know, you want it to just
Yeah.
be what it is and be free flowing. And maybe something we can talk about is as you're talking, I have a idea of given the recent book I did, like, ooh, maybe we could get some mixed media paintings that you've done into your book. And because you've probably already done 90% of the work, it's like,
Hmm.
but anyway, I digress.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, like writing's taking a little bit of a back
Yeah.
burner. It's on the back burner for me right now. But I did like in that period of time where I was trying to figure out like what is next for me. I still see myself teaching. For now, I want to
Mhm.
keep the studio going. I mean, for the foreseeable future, I don't have any plans to change that. Um, but I tiptoed down the path of several different things that were like, nope, this isn't it. Okay, try this.
Yeah.
Nope, that's not it. And
Yeah, your
then,
curiosity.
yep, just following my curiosity. And then it was actually last summer, I noticed I had a few conversations with people, and I heard myself say, if money and time were no object, I would go
Ooh.
back to school and get my master's in counseling. And after about the third time I heard myself say that out loud, I was like, maybe that's what I really want to do.
Oh my goodness. So, okay, tell me about that journey. I want to before we get off, ultimately, I want to touch on the Source Yoga journal that you
Oh,
guys
yeah, yeah, yeah.
publish. But how tell me about the impetus for going down this path of going back to school.
Yeah. Well, I'll touch on the journal piece because I feel like that's one place where I've been able to keep my creative juices flowing. I'm gonna grab the journal so I'll just give a little
Yes,
view. We've published
wonderful.
two. So I wanted to create something that gathered art and writing from the Source Yoga community. And the first one we published was in the winter of 2023. And I'll say Tamiko Nimura is a
Yes.
longtime Source student and community member, and she helped me edit. And then Burju Koleli is an artist, an amazing artist that helped with the layout and the design, and a lot of her pieces are in it. So this was our
Mhm.
first one. So
Wow,
I know this is her beautiful artwork and design, and
beautiful.
um, oh, this is a adorable little bookmark that
Oh,
she created,
I love it.
and um, and then it's like writing from our community and
Yeah,
some art, and it was
incredible.
so such a sweet little process of creating this. And then we created another one this last fall of 2024.
Wow,
I know,
I
isn't
love
that
it.
beautiful?
Yeah.
And then, there's like some art and
Oh,
writing from others. And
so
it's just,
amazing.
yeah, it's been a really lovely process. And that's been like one place where I've been able to, that's another thing of like, um, bringing my values and what is true to me into business.
Yeah.
So I have this side of me that's very literary. I love literature. I love reading. I read all the time. I love writing. I love words and I love creative
Mm.
process. And so I don't love traditional marketing I mean, I have to do a certain amount of that, right? But I've tried to, especially in the last couple of years, like what are just like creative, different ways to connect with community inside the studio and outside of the studio that I guess you could call it marketing, but it is like, it's just, this is an expression of who we are in the world.
Yes. Yeah. The
And
individual coming together. Mm-hmm.
so part of it is like these journals has been one piece of that. Like, let's just create something together and put it out there. And I mean, our response has been really wonderful. People love it.
Wow.
And we'll be doing another one. I
Yay.
just had a meeting with Tomiko last week about the next edition,
2025.
2025. Yes. Um, so that has been, yeah, that's been really fun. And then here's another way, like I've brought in this kind of literary piece, this literary love of mine is actually one of the former teachers, community members. She used to be the manager of the studio. Sherry um, created for me a little free library right outside the
Oh,
studio.
I love it.
And so I'm like always like I'm going to the library book sales and I'm trying to collect books all the time and stash them in there and keep it.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of one of the ways that I want to like be reaching out and giving back to community is through
Yeah.
books.
And it's such a sweet, neighborhood. I mean, granted, I have not been down there for a little while, but it's such a sweet space and such a great community. I mean,
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
It's definitely a lot of like a walking neighborhood. Like books go fast in that little free library. Like I have to
Ah,
keep it stocked every week. I have to put new books in there.
I love it so much. That's wonderful. I mean,
Hmm.
books, I have this, you hear people say, books are back, and that they're opening more bookstores and Barnes and all. I'm like, yeah, books are never gonna go anywhere. Like,
Hmm.
there's nothing like holding a book and the smell of a book and like it's the
Yes.
best thing in the world, really.
Yes. And
Oh my
support your
gosh.
local bookstores.
Yes.
Can't say enough about that. I'm working right now on like breaking up with the giant online.
Yes. Yes.
I
Me
mean,
too. It's so hard.
I generally don't buy books from them, but other things, and I'm trying to find other ways to do
Detach.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, divest myself.
So, we're going to wrap up soon, but I do want to talk about your journey to going back to school.
Yeah. So yeah, I had this, inclination. It kept showing up on my lists to go back to school and get my master's in counseling. And I was it just kept like, I kept brushing it aside because of the time. Oh, that's going to take forever. And the
Yeah.
money, like, how am I going to pay for this? And finally, when I was like, I think that's what I really want to do, I had to kind of let go of the like, I still don't know how I'm going to pay for it. And I'm figuring out the time.
Yeah.
I had all these prerequisites that I had to get. So I've been doing community college classes, psychology and sociology, and I love it
Wow.
so much. It's so fun to be a
Wow.
student again. It's much better being a student at almost 50 than it
Mhm.
was at
In your
20.
20s.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, and I've applied for a program in marriage and family therapy that starts next fall. So I'm
Oh,
waiting
wow.
to
Cross
hear
your
back.
fingers.
Cross my fingers.
But tell me about what brought you to want to study marriage and family counseling?
Yeah. Well, I have benefited from marriage and family counseling
Me
myself.
too.
My husband and I have had a great therapist for a few years now, and it's been hugely helpful.
Yeah.
When I was dealing with the anxiety about reopening the studio, I went into therapy. I got some counseling for myself that was really helpful. And I think there was this feeling of like that I've had with yoga and meditation that are hugely valuable resources. And I feel like they may not always be enough
Mm.
for people. Um, and I felt limited in my ability to really help people and address the very real, difficult things that could arise through a meditation practice, through a yoga
Mm.
practice. Like it does, these practices can really stir up a lot of stuff for folks, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I, as a yoga teacher, as a meditation teacher, I'm not specifically trained to really help people with the deep traumas that are arising. And
Yeah.
so I did have this feeling of like wanting to be able to go deeper with people. And I have been kind of a psychology nerd for a long
Yeah.
time, like listen to psychology podcasts and read psychology related books. So there was a kind of a natural movement in that direction.
Yeah.
And I think mostly I want to work with individuals, but I want to be trained to work with couples and
Yeah.
families. And
And there's such a need for it right now,
it's
you
such a
know.
need.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's even beyond COVID, what we're going through right now, politically, et cetera. And I just think it's really admirable that one of the reasons that you want to do it is to be able to support your community in that way, your clients and students, et cetera. To be able to just have another layer of wisdom for your
Yeah.
people. Hmm.
Yeah. When you look at like the teachings of yoga and the teachings of the Buddha, they are about the mind.
Hmm.
They're practices that help us understand ourselves better,
Hmm.
understand our minds better. And so I think it's funny, I know quite a few yoga teachers that are making this move towards psychology or psychology related
Interesting.
fields. There's a lot of movement in that direction. And I think that's it, is like we have been exploring these practices of gaining deeper understanding for ourselves. And there's a place, I mean, I think that people that have a yoga practice, a meditation practice, and are serious about this process of understanding themselves better, I think like bringing in therapy and
Yeah.
um, that kind of support is really valuable in that process as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting you know, we could go on about the mind body connection, there's so many layers to it. So
Yeah,
yeah, I do find, and I've done therapy for years, now I'm focusing personally on, obviously meditation, but also connecting reconnecting with my body and what's,
yeah.
inside and being
Well, and
able to,
I think
yeah,
a lot of psychology is very like cognitive. It's
yeah,
very like in the like top down, as they say. And I think because of my yoga and meditation, mindfulness experience and practice and teaching, I I really want to kind of help people find like kind of tune into their bodies more,
yeah,
like bring in somatic practices, bring in mindfulness, and maybe movement so that
yeah.
it's not so much a heady
Cerebral.
cerebral experience, but we're like how are we processing all of that in our bodies, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of something that I've noticed is, through the journey I've been on the last few months and talking to all these healers and practitioners, there's just I just noticed that there's a lot of people hurting, and so I think, the through line is that, you and I want to find ways to help people, and also learn as we go and expand our knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. Um, well, we're pretty much out of time, and I could talk to you all day.
I know, me too.
Is there anything else that you would like the audience to know?
Hmm. Um, well, I don't think I said that, if you are in the Tacoma area, come see me at Source Yoga. Um, but I do teach online. So you could, I've got people that join me from lots of different places when I teach online. I've got a student that's down in California. She's there every week. I do an online meditation every Monday at noon
Mm.
Pacific time. I have somebody who joins me from Denmark.
Oh,
It's
wow.
not like it's 9 p.m. for her there, and she meditates with our group and then goes to bed.
I love it.
Um, yeah, so you can find me there. And
And
yeah, I
I'll
do
put
lots of local
all,
retreats. So retreats in Washington a couple
yes.
times a year, a few times a year. Yeah.
Let's shout out to you have one coming up soon,
So
or this spring.
June,
Mhm.
so June, I've got some dates for a retreat on Whidbey Island. Um, and that's, I don't know, I think it's like the 7th through the 9th or something.
Okay,
But all of that information's on the Source Yoga website. If you, yeah, search Source
beautiful.
Yoga Tacoma or Source Yoga Online is our website. Yeah,
Okay, perfect. And I'll put all that in the show notes, of course, so people can
great.
find you. Oh, Erin, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And it's always
Mm.
really sweet to connect with you again and
Yes,
talk. And
absolutely.
yeah,
Okay, have a great day.
thank you.